The Appalachian frontier in the 18th century was a weird, wild, violent, and beautiful place. In the coming weeks and months on the Deerskin Diary channel, we'll deep dive into a variety of topics dealing with frontier life. From food and clothing to warfare and tactics, we will strive to keep it interesting and wherever possible, relevant to the things you can associate with today. So welcome to the first video in our series, The Frontier, Life, Legend, and Legacy. When Europeans first ventured into the wilds of the frontier, they found a land virgin to them, but in reality, it was no such thing. The land had been inhabited for thousands of years by a variety of native cultures, and by the time that Thomas Walker walked into the Cumberland Gap in 1750, those native cultures had already left their indelible marks in the landscape, and yet they themselves had been transformed and altered starting 200 years prior, when Hernando de Soto took his knights into what would become the American frontier. Disease, trade goods, and political alliances changed the trajectory of native cultures forever. As Europeans explored in the coming decades, the frontier became a diverse blending of people played by the landscape and a landscape played by the people. English, French, German, Swiss, Irish, and other Europeans interacted with Shawnee, Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, Catawbas, and others. Africans, both enslaved and free, found their way into the backcountry as well. It was the original American melting pot and a true clashing of cultures at the same time. People mixed and matched. They borrowed useful traits from one another, and some of those traits still living on today in our food and our language. Foods like jerky, corn, black-eyed peas, and red peas still represent part of the original American melting pot. The New World was expanding with hunters, trappers, explorers, surveyors, and families seeking new lives, traveling westward for a variety of individual reasons. All of them were seeking something more. The frontier foreigners found themselves in the middle of a place that sometimes mystified their reality and offered few explanations. Animals such as bison, alligators, and mountain lion were wild spectacles to the eyes of those who had never seen them. Vast canebrakes swallowed large game trails and Indian paths. Massive trees dotted the landscape, and there were abundant grasslands filled with game. Waterways, both large and small, were filled with fish and fowl alike. Natural salt licks drew people and game. Europeans even found woolly mammoth skeletons and fossils which defied all logic, leading some to believe the frontier contained flesh-eating elephants. It was a true sportsman's paradise with an abundance of deer, black bear, bison, elk, turkey, geese, and ducks for food. Beaver, otter, and raccoon were trapped for their pelts, while watchful eyes guarded against wolves and mountain lions. In future episodes, we'll look at hunting and fishing techniques and practices, at least the ones that are still legal, and hopefully with some success. Perhaps most importantly, in the unsettled wilds, there was money to be made, intermingled with all of the risk. Europe became an enormous market for rice, indigo, and tobacco grown along the southern coasts and plains, but the real money came less with agriculture than with the hunting of the white-tailed deer. It became the catalyst that thrust the southern frontier onto the world stage and into the international market. Native and European hunters both sought deer not for their meat, but for their hides. The trade of hides for goods and money led to a substantial economic trade, but also led to inevitable conflict for access to the land and its deer. The deer hides were placed in barrels and hogsheads and sent by the thousands to Williamsburg, Augusta, Savannah, and Charleston to be sold in Europe for gloves, women's shoes, and men's breeches. Some scholars have estimated that 1.5 million pounds of leather was exported annually. And folks, that's about 1 million deer. The deerskin trade became so voracious that the American slang term for money is still the word, wait for it, buck. There was money to be made. There was also violence. The frontier was a violent place. For many, it was home in a consistent war zone. Superpowers like England and France both jockeyed for position in the new lands. Along with the fighting came an emergence of new tactics that Europeans had never seen before, and they had to adjust quickly. Many of these fighting styles were adapted from Native American warfare and blended with European tactics to eventually become uniquely American. This prompted General William Tecumseh Sherman, later and in a very different war, to call his Civil War Atlanta campaign a Big Indian War because of the skirmish-style fighting on both sides. In future videos in this series, we'll look at 18th century warfare and tactics, and we'll talk about things like their use of concealment and camouflage, their use of cover, and we'll look at the not-so-lost art of tracking and counter-tracking. And if I do my job right, you'll come away with some understanding and lessons that will help you as a hunter, outdoors enthusiast, or just an all-around history buff. Now, it's going to take some time, but this future series of videos is going to present numerous aspects of daily life on the American frontier in the 18th century. So join us.
Come share history with us on the Deerskin Diary.